Mayor Mills, you may start.
We're ready to go?
Yep.
Okay, thank you very much, IT Department. It is Monday, March 14th, 2022 at 10 o'clock a.m. This is a training session on the Freedom of Information Act and ethics. I want to thank those that are here to help make this happen. That's Ann Womack, City Secretary and FOIA Coordinator. Also Glenn Mandela, City Solicitor, but also to help run this meeting virtually. I want to thank members of the IT department, specifically Brant McCormick, Joe, and Max. Thank you all for being on board today. And I'd like to, of course, thank members of all our committees. You all are volunteers, and we appreciate your time and commitment for being on there. We are here today because of your membership on those committees. And as members of a city committee, you've become a part of the city government. And all members of the city government have to abide by state rules governing transparency under the Freedom of Information Act, as well as following ethics guidelines. We are conducting this training for your awareness. Thank you again for being here. Just to let you know that we have had an expanded version of FOIA and ethics training for targeting commissions and boards. That's an expanded version, so you'll be happy to know that this is the unexpanded or condensed version, believe it or not. I think they might like to have questions as you go, but please understand that they may ask you to defer your question because there may be a response further down in the presentation. With that, I'd like to hand it over to Glenn. And he's going to say a few words, and then Ann and Glenn will work in tandem to make this presentation today. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor, and thanks everybody for being here. This is important training that we're happy to be bringing to you, and it makes our jobs easier, the better trained that you all are on these important topics. As the Mayor said, there's two topics we're covering today. First is the Freedom of Information Act, and we're going to follow that with some training on ethics. And as he indicated, this is sort of FOIA and Ethics 101. We're looking at kind of the basic platform. As you get more and more into your role on a board or commission, the issues get nuanced, and you're probably going to have, questions that go to a deeper level, and we're available to answer those questions as they come. But this is the training that should give you kind of the foundation to be able to recognize red flags along the way, things you should be thinking about, and understand, how open meetings work with regard to FOIA. We will be taking questions as the training goes, but if you ask a question that's, we anticipate addressing that question later in the training, we'll hold off until that portion of the training to address your question. So Ms. Womack, who is our FOIA coordinator and the city secretary, is going to start off with the Freedom of Information Act. And Ann, if you'll share your screen, you have the floor.
And before you do that, for those that are unfamiliar with this program, if you play with your mouse cursor right this very second, scroll it down toward the bottom of your screen, you'll see a pop-up on your screen that from left to right goes join audio. If you want to mute yourself or unmute yourself, there's an icon there to click. Stop video, same thing. Then in the almost direct center of the bottom horizontal bar, there is a icon that says participants. If you click on participants, you will get a list on the right side of your screen with all the participants. At the very bottom right corner of the participant list, you'll see an icon that says raise hand. That's how you get my attention so I can call on you to ask you any questions. Barring that failing, try to unmute yourself and just blurt out your name, and we'll get to your question. Thank you very much. Ann, we'll turn it over to you.
Good morning, everyone. This is Freedom of Information Act, commonly known as FOIA and ethics. Let's see if I can share my screen. Can everybody see that?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. This is a guide to introduce you to the Delaware Freedom of Information Act as it relates to your participation on a city board, commission, committee, task force. I don't think my screen is moving.
Try your mouse.
Oh, there we go. Okay, the state's Freedom of Information Act, commonly known as FOIA, is found in Title 29 of the state government, General Regulations for State Agencies, Chapter 100, Freedom of Information Act. And below is the preamble, the Declaration of Policy. It is vital in a democratic society that public business be performed in an open and public manner so that our citizens shall have the opportunity to observe the performance of public officials and to monitor the decisions that are made by such officials in formulating and executing public policy. And further, it is vital that citizens have easy access to public records in order that the society remain free and democratic.
And can I just interject there for a moment? Because there's an
Sure.
interesting bill right now before the state legislature. If you notice, that declaration of policy talks about an opportunity to observe and an opportunity to monitor the public body, or in this case, the city's government. You won't find any place in the Freedom of Information Act a requirement that the public body take public comment. There are some other state laws that require public hearings, and in those instances, the public body has to take public comment, but strictly under the Freedom of Information Act, there's no requirement for the public body to take public comment. There is a bill right now that's been introduced at the state legislature that would require public bodies to take public comment during their open meetings. So we'll have to watch that one this year and see how it turns out.
But we are also very generous.
Well, that's a good point, Mayor. We, in the city of Rehoboth Beach, this administration definitely takes time to take an incredible amount of public comment. I think in the end, it works out better. Getting that public input kind of informs everybody, but under a strict reading of the Freedom of Information Act, it's not required. Thanks, Ann.
Okay. FOIA prescribes conduct to comply with the state law. This training guide has content that's been condensed from the full version of state law. We would want you to consult with your commission, committee board, or task force chair, or the city's FOIA coordinator, which is me, with any questions. Any board, bureau, commission, department, agency, committee, ad hoc committee, special committee, temporary committee, advisory board and committee, subcommittee, legislative committee, association, group, panel, council, and any other entity or body is subject to FOIA. There's an obligation to comply with the Freedom of Information Act. As a member of any of these entities, you're now part of a governmental body which must comply with FOIA, regardless of whether or not your commission, board, committee, task force, etc., has regulatory powers or only as advisory.
And I'm sorry for interrupting again, Ann, but I want to just put an emphasis on how broad that definition of public body is. Any board, bureau, commission, all these other things that it mentions, because it's very easy to think you're not performing or acting as a public body when actually you are. There's an interesting case, one of the school boards upstate decided to have kind of breakfast meetings with the school staff, and anybody could show up. So, but what happened is a quorum of the school board members started showing up at these breakfast get-togethers, and somebody challenged them and said, "Is that actually a meeting? When you get together, you just having breakfast with the staff? How are things going?" You know, then the Attorney General's office said, "Yeah, that was a public body conducting public business. Just breakfast meetings. It seemed very innocuous, but it was deemed to be a public body acting." And we have a question here, Ann. Can you come up to the mic so we can get it recorded on the video? Thanks.
Steve, turn it on first.
I think it's on. I think they tested it.
No, it's not.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Steve Kirsten, I have a question. You said, was that meeting official because it had a quorum?
Right.
So if it didn't have a quorum, it wouldn't be official?
That's correct.
Okay.
That's right. You can get together with members of a public body can get together so long as it's less than a quorum, and you can even talk about public business if it's less than a quorum. And Ann's going to talk a little bit later about how that can get into trouble if you meet several times. But just a subset of a public body that's less than a quorum, that group can meet without violating FOIA. Thanks, Ann.
There are two basic components of FOIA. The first one being open meetings, which are public meetings. And this is a meeting for purposes of FOIA for formal gathering of a quorum for the purpose of discussing or taking action on public business. The public meetings, open meetings, must be noticed with at least 7 days notice given to conduct any of the meetings. There are exceptions that apply. One of them in particular is an executive session, and another is a special meeting. Glenn, did you want to add anything on that?
I feel like you want me to add something on that. What did you have in mind?
I don't have anything in mind.
Well, I mean, I'll just mention executive sessions. Executive sessions really should be the exception to the rule. Public bodies, I mean, the whole idea of FOIA is for the public body or for the public to have access to its government, to be able to see what its government's doing, to be able to monitor its government. So it should be rare that the public body goes into an executive session. You know, oftentimes I'll see different jurisdictions have just a standard executive session on every agenda they post. And at the end of the meeting, they can go into executive session for personnel issues, for example, is an exception. Litigation matters is an exception. But those are, again, supposed to be limited circumstances. So litigation, for example, sometimes a public body will say, we should go into executive session to talk about this because it could lead to litigation. Well, until you've got an actual threat of litigation, until you've got a letter from a lawyer saying, if you do this, we will bring an action, you don't have a real threat of litigation. So just anticipating that there might be litigation over something doesn't get to the bar of when you can go into an executive session. So I guess the point there is just to be very cautious about making sure when you're considering an executive session that is for a proper purpose, and those are laid out in the statute.
And I'd like to share the chair's perspective, if you would. 7 days notice, I've got a obligation to notice a meeting with 7 days or more in advance. And you can see sometimes some of our committee members have been canceled because our committees have been canceled because we haven't been able to meet that 7-day rule. Also, note the guidelines for the agenda must include a general statement of items to be discussed at the meeting. If you'll notice, sometimes chairs have to keep everything on track and shut down conversation because it gets beyond the agenda. So now you can see where those rules come from. Ann, go ahead.
Let me just add, Mayor, also is that it is interesting. You know, people sometimes act as though government doesn't move as quickly as they'd like it to move. You got to keep in mind, Freedom of Information Act requires that we think 7 days in advance of everything we're going to do. It has to be noticed 7 days. I mean, imagine running your own personal life, having to schedule everything you're going to do 7 days ahead of time. it's, you're kind of playing with one arm tied behind your back.
Thank you. Ann?
Okay, as the mayor stated with the agenda, it's a guide for the content of the meetings. It's also the chair's obligation to keep the meeting on track. The agenda must be posted timely in advance of the meeting per the notice requirement. And it includes a general statement of the major issues expected to be discussed at a public meeting. Open meetings also involve a quorum of members that are required to formally conduct business. A quorum's considered 51% of the membership. So if you have 9 members in your committee, you would be required to have 5 members present to hold a public meeting. A gathering of a quorum or more of members outside of formal public meetings to discuss business is prohibited. Subcommittees, etc., has similar rules. A quorum can be formed inadvertently through multiple one-on-one contacts with members via emails, phone calls, when business is discussed, and especially if trying to seek concurrence with discussion topics. This is known as a serial meeting and is prohibited.
So that follows up on Steve's question a little bit. Is, it's fine for less than a quorum of members to get together and discuss something, but you can have a serial violation of the open meetings law, and this is the way it would happen. So you have a 5-member body and 3 members make a quorum. So it's fine for 2 members to get together and talk about an agenda item that's coming up on their meeting. So member number 1, member number 2 get together over lunch. They talk about their thoughts, what they think of this topic that's going to be discussed, and they kind of come to an agreement as to where they think they are on the topic. They're going to hear more during the meeting, and maybe their minds will be changed, but at this point, they've kind of have consensus between the 2 of them as to the direction this topic should go. Then that member number 2 calls member number 3 and says, hey, I got together with member number 1, and here's what we discussed. How do you feel about it? At that point, you've got 3 people of the body talking about a topic that's going to be talked about in an open public meeting, trying to gain consensus outside of the public view. So, I mean, that's the whole idea behind FOIA, is that the public should be able to see the public body coming to that consensus. So once it reaches a quorum of members, even if it's serially through multiple emails and phone calls and personal conversations, that's still a violation of the open meeting law. And there's example after example in the Attorney General opinions of this happening. So it's something you need to be really, really cognizant of and try to avoid.
And from the chair perspective, how I look at it is, even though you may be able to meet with under a quorum, the desire here for me as chair is to get you to speak openly at your committee meeting. And what has happened in the past is some committee members talk outside the committee, and then they formalize some thoughts and don't share them at the committee meeting. And that to me is a failing in this system a little bit.
Well, the other thing that happens, Mayor, is, and it would never happen in Rehoboth Beach, but it happens in other jurisdictions, is that the public shows up for a meeting, and there's a topic that is kind of a complex topic, but the public body deals with it in 5 minutes. And it's because it's all staged. They've all talked, they've all, and the public knows. The public isn't, they're in tune. They know that something must have happened behind the scenes. And it's just unfair. The public is supposed to see the public body, work through the issue and come to a resolution of it. So to tee it up outside of the meeting is just not in, the spirit of FOIA.
Again, not in Rehoboth Beach.
Not in Rehoboth Beach, never.
And go ahead.
True.
Every meeting shall be open to the public except for executive sessions. And I believe that might be the only one that's considered a specific circumstance by FOIA.
That's all I can think of, is
Citizen
right.
participation. Citizens have the right to observe, but not to speak during meetings. The allowance of citizen input during the meetings is the purview of the chair. Meeting minutes are required. Minutes shall be taken of each meeting and consist minimally of a record of members present and a record of each vote taken and action agreed upon. Typically in this city, there's a combination of detailed minutes and action minutes. When there are public hearings, we sometimes have to have a court reporter do actual transcripts for us. But generally, the minutes are the ones that stand for just a regular meeting. Minutes are approved by the membership at a subsequent meeting. FOIA does not prohibit members of a public body from participating in other groups or attending other functions so long as at those gatherings they do not discuss as a quorum the public business of the public body of which they are members.
And that one comes up from
And do
time.
you have anything to add on that?
Yeah, I do. Thanks, Ann. That one comes up from time to time. We'll get questions about the chambers having a function and all of the city commissioners want to attend it. Is that okay? Do we have to notice that as a meeting because they're all going to be in the same location? No, it's not. It's not a meeting, and they can attend. So I think about it a lot of times like going to a baseball game. The whole group of city commissioners or the planning commissioner, whatever group could go to a baseball game and talk about even political topics. They could talk about what's going on in Ukraine. They could talk about what happened last night at some other event. It's fine. There's no problem with that. It's only when they start moving into topics that they're going to discuss as a public body. That's the public business. So it's not a problem if, sometimes I get the sense that people feel like we should never see 5 city commissioners, for example, together unless it's a noticed public meeting because that's a quorum for them. But no, they can attend functions and do all those things and be in the same room so long as they're not discussing public business. So that's why it says FOIA does not prohibit members of the public body from participating in other groups. You can participate, and you don't even have to notice it as a meeting so long as it's not public city business.
Well, and I'd just like to clarify that the first line there says every meeting shall be open to the public. And obviously, this is applicable to commissions, committees, boards, task force. We are allowed to have private meetings in terms of Glenn and I can meet in private, or I can meet with the city manager in private, or the city manager can meet with 1 or even 2 commissioners in private with a staff member. So we're talking about different types of meetings there, but specifically for committees, commissions, boards, task force, they all need to be open meetings. Ann, go ahead.
The second component of FOIA is the open public records portion of it. And that consists of all written communications relative to the business of the commission, committee, board, or task force between commission, committee, board, or task force members, or with anyone. They're considered public documents and shall be produced upon request. Now, there are a few exceptions. Glenn, would you like to expand on that?
Well, yeah, sure. Thanks, Ann. So the exceptions include things that, for example, if you're communicating with the city attorney, those are protected by the attorney-client privilege. So those are not documents that would have to be turned over on a FOIA request. But to be clear, what I typically tell clients, municipal clients, is that expect it to be on the front page of the newspaper, because if you write it down and it relates to your position on a committee, board, or commission, it's available. And sometimes people think that because it's their private computer or it's their private email address, that for some reason those emails are not subject to FOIA. They are. Your text messages on your phone, if under certain procedures, they can be sought and obtained. So if you're talking about public business in your capacity as a member on one of these boards or commissions, you really need to expect that it's going to be available to the public to see. I don't mean to be like chastising, but there's been a lot of times where things like that have happened where, we had a case not too long ago, different jurisdiction, where on the merits, our litigation case was pretty good, but there was some activity that went on behind the scenes. And what happens in litigation is you get into a phase called discovery. And during discovery, you can take depositions of the other side, you can request documents on the other side. And we knew that if these certain documents were produced, our case would get much worse. So, and same thing here. The public should be able to see, again, the public body acting and being observed as they conduct their business. So that also includes being observed by looking at the documents that you've written and the text that you've sent.
So Glenn, if personal emails having to do with city business become city property, then what are some alternatives for the committee members to protect themselves, such as creating a new dedicated email just for that committee?
Right, so, once in a while, Mayor, well, not once in a while, pretty often, the city will get FOIA requests. It's a requirement now that every public body up and down the state have a form or a portal to be able, for members of the public to be able to reach out to the public body and say, I'd like to see all the emails for over the last week relating to this agenda topic from the members of the Planning Commission. At that time, city staff will send out an email to that public body, or we'll do it through some other means, but we'll indicate that we need to have your emails. So rather than having to sift through all your personal emails to find which ones are relevant to this request for documents, sometimes it helps to have a separate email account that you use for all your public business. So you know that that's where I'm going to find all the emails that relate to this FOIA request. It makes it easier for you, and it makes it kind of, there's been times when we have had to ask people to bring their personal computers in, and the IT department here will basically scrub your computer for emails that relate to this FOIA request. Well, sometimes I don't want the IT department, seeing the emails between me and my mom, so maybe have your own dedicated email accounts that is specifically for your job as a public appointee. Is that where you're going with that, Mayor, or was there something else you were thinking? Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ann.
Ann?
Which brings us to the last portion of this part of the training session. If any members have any questions, we can field them at this time.
Thank you, Ann. Mary Peck?
Yes, I just want to say, one time in an environment committee meeting, I started talking about a topic, and Ann said to me, that's not on the agenda. You can't talk about that today. And later, I looked up the FOIA law, and I found out, and maybe Ann doesn't know, or so I'm going to say it. The agenda can be changed at the meeting, and so it's kind of in the discretion of the chair. If a new topic comes up at the meeting that wasn't put in the agenda that was published, that's allowed under FOIA. That's how I read the FOIA law.
Glenn, you want to respond to that?
Sure, Mayor. So the more recent opinions that have come out, and shouldn't say more recent, this has been over the course of the last decade or more, have basically said, yes, agendas can change, but it can only change if you have to provide a reason why you're changing the agenda and why you couldn't provide the 7 days notice that is typically required. So it comes down to really, is this more of an urgent matter that you can't provide the 7 days notice? If you can provide the 7 days notice, the FOIA opinions, this is like FOIA case law, say you have to provide the 7 days, notwithstanding what the actual language of FOIA says. But that's the way the opinions have come down, and that's the way we've implemented in all the jurisdictions that I represent.
Well, and I like us to be mindful that the whole purpose of FOIA is transparency. And so we want to give as much notice as we can to the public so that they can come and participate, or they can come and witness the topic. Even the commissioners, mayor and commissioners meeting, we have public comment at the end. And we may listen to a comment that makes a general reference to a street needing maintenance or something. But when that topic then segues into something deeper and a full-depth discussion of this annual maintenance program, I, as chair, have to cut it off. And then I would put it on a future agenda again so that everybody's noticed, the public has an awareness of it, and then they can choose to attend the next meeting. Also, there is somewhat the need for specificity within the agenda. To put on there that an agenda item that says Street and Transportation Committee will make a report on a street and transportation issue, that could be suffice if it's just a general report with no expectation of feedback from commissioners or members of the public. However, if the intent to give that report is to have a full-blown discussion of crosswalks on Rehoboth Avenue, then again, I would have to postpone that meeting to a future meeting where the agenda specifically indicates that it would be crosswalks that are discussed. So Ann is right to cut us off when we get beyond, and I've cut people off, and Glenn has cut people off, because we're trying to do our best to comply with FOIA and avoid any challenges. Mary, anything follow-up you'd like?
Yeah, I think the specific circumstance was that in our Environment Committee, we always have on our agenda one section called correspondence. And then whatever correspondence has come in, and we usually have links to if they're emails or whatever. And so there was somebody sent an email to us about something that they were concerned with. And so I wanted to talk about that. And Ann said, that's not on the agenda. And I said, well, it's in the correspondence. And she said, well, that's not the agenda. So I really thought that was a misinterpretation of FOIA, and that first, if it says correspondence and the correspondence is on the agenda, I could talk about it. And second, and not knowing what, Glenn had just said about interpretation, the law just says simply that the agenda can be changed at the meeting, and that's up to the chair. And so I was just surprised that I couldn't talk about the correspondence because the topic wasn't on the agenda.
Thank you, Mary. I would give the same response as I just gave to citizen comment at the end of a meeting. Correspondence is for our awareness. And if it has to do with an agenda topic, then I can have full-blown discussion of it. However, if that correspondence brings up a new topic, the appropriate thing for the chair to do is to indicate that that would be on a future agenda so that it can be noticed again to the public as well as to the members of the committee, and then discussion could take place at a future meeting. So this is all done properly. Glenn, do you want to add anything? Are we?
No, I agree, Mayor. That's the way I see it as well.
Again, we're in a government setting. There are different rules than private business, aren't there? Unfortunately, but we have to adhere to that, and that is the program. Thank you, Mary. We hear you. Janice Miller and then Nettie Green. Janice Miller, please.
Good morning. Hi, it's Janice Miller here, and I have two questions for clarification. The first one has to do with quorum. I'm on a public body in Virginia, and we are allowed to only meet with 2 people, no matter how many people are on the committee. But so in Delaware, it's 49% of the people of a task force or group can meet to discuss business without advertising.
That's correct, and I'm aware that Virginia has that other law that two is the limit. But no, in Delaware, so long as you're not meeting in a quorum, depending on how large your public body is, you can meet with 2, 3, 4 members. You just can't cross over that threshold of 50%.
Oh, okay, good. I wanted to make sure I had that information correct.
Mhm.
The second question for clarification is regarding an email address. Does Rehoboth Beach provide email addresses to conduct town business, or should we set up our own email address via, shall we say, Gmail?
Do you want to address that, Mayor? The city commissioners have city email accounts, but I think that's the only body, right?
Right. For committees, the expectation is that individual members would create their own. So create your own Gmail account and mention the committee name in it, if you will. But that's on the committee member, yes.
Okay, super. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Janice. Nettie Green, please. Nettie, you need to unmute yourself if you're talking.
It's new business. I guess new business, you cannot bring up a new topic. That's one of my questions. I was just asking, can you
Well-
bring up a new topic in new business?
No, the new business needs to be specified in the agenda.
Okay,
So
okay.
that's back to Mary Peck's question. No, there needs to be enough specificity in the agenda to indicate where we're going. The agendas are often divided into reports, old business and new business, and it's merely a mechanism for alerting everybody to whether the topic's been addressed at a previous meeting and being continued, or whether it is truly new business and being presented for the first time.
Okay, okay. The other question is having to do with quorum. And this is like we can email another person on the committee, and it's the quorum rule still stands with emails too. You can discuss something with another person by email or text as long as you don't have a quorum.
That's
Is
right.
this correct?
That's right. Mhm.
Okay, those are my questions.
That's a good way.
Thank you
of putting
very
it. That's a good way of putting it. Even electronically, the quorum rule still applies, right?
Thank you.
Now, this doesn't preclude some things from being a reply or a email sent to the entire committee. For instance, the chair could send out a note with the agenda on it. And obviously that goes to everybody, but where I always recommend the chair should at the bottom of that email say, this is not intended to solicit a group response, because that's when you get into trouble. So I would say absolutely avoid reply all, just reply individually to a chair or to somebody, but not a group response.
That's a good point, Mayor. So think of it as sort of passive versus active communications. The chair or a member of the committee can say in an email to the entire group, a quorum or more, hey, I'm attaching this document. It relates to our agenda topic 5A for next Monday. And then put on that email, please don't reply all, because if you start to reply, because the problem is when somebody replies all and says, oh, I looked at page 5 of that document you just sent, and here's some thoughts on it. Now it's becoming an active discussion about the document. Passive communication, just pushing out the document to the entire committee, no problem. It's when you start having that exchange of emails now with a quorum on there that you're violating FOIA.
Anything else, Mary?
Yes, as far as the emails go, and I'm trying to make a distinction between the public records rule versus the open meeting rule. So I was a little concerned when Glenn was saying that the emails can fall under public records, and if people ask for public records, can request public records and see all the emails. Does that include emails between people where it's less than a quorum? Like if I have a few emails going back with maybe 2 members of the Environment Committee, and we are talking about issues, but it's less than a quorum, are those public records?
They are. Yep, they are public records, and so are emails when you're not even talking to another member of the public body. Say a citizen reaches out to you and says, I see this is on your agenda for next week. Here are some thoughts about it. What do you think? That email exchange is subject to public records. So it pretty much, like I say, if you're going to write it down and it relates to your committee and agenda topics that you're going to be discussing, you should anticipate that that's going to be available to the public. Interestingly, by the way, the state legislature in the state FOIA law has carved out an exception for themselves. Their emails are not subject to FOIA. So kind of an interesting take on the law.
Thank you. Mary, anything else?
No, but I will say that I do email members of the Environment Committee and have discussions with 2 or 3 people, and I did not realize that those could be subject to public record requests.
So we've accomplished something today then, right? Somebody learned something new.
Thank you, Mary. Anybody else? Anybody else here? Got any questions? I don't seeing no more questions. Any further comments that you can think of, Ann or Glenn?
Not for me, Mayor.
All righty,
Glenn,
otherwise.
can you elaborate on when there are emails between members on whatever, a task force committee or whatever, and it goes from one member to another, isn't that considered a serial meeting?
Emails, yeah, we touched on that a little bit, but yes, if you've got an email that one member sends to another member, and the second member, say it's a 5-member group, so 3 is a quorum, say member number 1 sends an email to member number 2, here's something I'm thinking about this agenda topic, then member number 2 replies back and copies a 3rd member, so now there are 3 people. That is a serial meeting by email, correct? Is that what you were thinking, Ann?
Yes, thank you.
So the point is, there's no way to circumvent FOIA and transparency.
There isn't.
All right, thank you very much. With that, we'll move on to ethics. I'm hopeful you're able to condense some of these slides so that we don't have to read every word of them. You can go back on your own and read all the words, but we'll get into the essence of ethics, which is kind of challenging to describe sometimes.
Yeah, and again, this is just really the basics of ethics. There's lots of layers that you'll get into as you serve on your board or commission, and we can have deeper discussions when those issues come up. But this is intended to be kind of the basics. And if you thought FOIA was riveting and exciting, here comes ethics. All right, so in the city of Rehoboth Beach, we are subject to the state's code of conduct. Some other jurisdictions aren't subject to that. There's a whole process that was set out where municipalities could set up their own code of conduct. Rehoboth didn't do that back when it was able to. I think that was the right choice personally. But we're subject to the state code of conduct. It's actually called Laws Regulating Conduct of Officers and Employees of the State, and there's the code reference to it. This next paragraph lays out who is subject to the state code of conduct. All you really need to know is that you are, as a political subdivision of the state, and then our committees being the political subdivisions of the city itself, everybody who is appointed or elected within the city and our employees are subject to the state code of conduct. Next slide, Ann. This is the statement of policy that's set out in the code. In our democratic form of government, the conduct of members of public bodies, including committees, commissions, boards, and task forces, must hold the respect and confidence of the people. They must therefore avoid conduct which is in violation of the public trust or which creates a justifiable impression among the public that such trust is being violated. I relate this back to 9 years old, little Glenn, in Boy Scouts, when they kept harping on me, don't lie, cheat, or steal, or tolerate others who do. It really, a lot of this whole ethics thing comes back to that. Don't lie, cheat, steal, tolerate others who do. And that's sort of the embodiment of this statement of policy that's found in the Code of Conduct. Next slide talks about some of the basic concepts in the Code of Conduct. The first bullet, each committee, commission, board, or task force member shall endeavor to pursue a course of conduct which will not raise suspicion among the public that such member is engaging in acts which are in violation of the public trust and which will not reflect unfavorably upon the city and its government. That's kind of a double negative there, but it's just a basic concept. We're supposed to, the public is looking at its government and the public should be able to have trust in its government. So if you're doing something that violates that public trust or causes the public to, suspicion, then we're probably not holding ourselves up to the standards that the Code of Conduct requires. Personal and private interests that rise to the level of violating the public's trust include making any recommendations and or taking any actions that benefit a member to the exclusion of others, including financially. It says including financially, so it's not just financially. Oftentimes people think I'm fine so long as I'm not putting money in my pocket by voting on this item or whatever, but it's not always financial. There are other advantages you can get, or other things that can, other opportunities that can be opened up to you because of your conduct on the public body. And if you're doing that, if you're voting on something that's going to provide either something to you financially or something to you that's intangible, but it's still a benefit to you, that is an instance where you probably need to step away from that agenda item because it violates these basic concepts of ethics. Next slide. These are some of the specific prohibitions that are included within the Code of Conduct itself. First is impairment of independence of judgment in the exercise of official duties. So this is basically bias, right? You're impaired. Somehow you can't carry out your official duty with independence, so it's bias. Next is an undertaking to give preferential treatment to any person. So that's giving an unfair advantage to somebody. You know, by virtue of your membership on a public body, you can vote one way or take some action that gives an advantage to somebody. Shouldn't be doing that. Can't give an unfair advantage. The making of a governmental decision outside official channels. So that basically means you need to follow the rules. You can't basically come in the back door rather than coming in the front door to make a decision or to provide something to somebody that's not inconsistent with the rules that have been set up. Any adverse effect on the confidence of the public in the integrity of the government of the city. I just boil that down to don't be shady. Again, don't do something that causes the public to say, are they acting in the best interest of the public? You know, it's that public trust issue. Acquiring a financial interest in any private enterprise which an official has reason to believe may be directly involved in decisions to be made by such official in an official capacity on behalf of the city. So I kind of look at that one as kind of insider trading. You've learned something by virtue of being on this public body. Now you're going to take that and use it to your advantage. That's kind of insider trading. Trading can't do that. Continuing on with prohibitions, using public office to secure unwarranted privileges, private advancement, or gain. So that's using your influence. You know, somebody out in the public thinks they're going to get special treatment if they do something for you, or you have an expectation that you'll get something from them if you do something for them in your official capacity. Don't use your influence that way. People, believe it or not, in these roles, people really, you know, understand that you have some level of power in quotes, and even if you don't see yourself that way, others in public see you that way. So you need to be careful not to be accepting privileges that are given to you because you're on this public body. Even you just have to be wary of it. Realize that it happens. Disclosing confidential information gained by reason of. That's the next one. Disclosing confidential information gained by reason of one's public position or using such information for personal benefit. So disclosing confidential information, loose lips sink ships. So you don't want to disclose confidential information, and you don't want to use that information for personal benefit. That's kind of trading up again. You've learned something confidentially by virtue of being on this public body. You can't then use that information somehow to trade up to personal benefit. Using the this one doesn't need any explanation. You can read that one and figure it out. All right, and if we can move on. So one component of ethics is this idea of conflicts of interest. And this area of ethics deals with whether a member of a city committee, commission, board, or task force has a conflict of interest that would preclude them from participating in a committee and voting on a particular city issue by virtue of conflicting or perception of a conflicting personal or private interest. So here's how the state code defines what a personal or private interest is. A personal or private interest in a matter is an interest which tends to impair a person's independence of judgment in the performance of the person's duties with respect to that matter. So if you can't be an independent decision maker, you likely have a conflict of interest. If you're coming into something and you kind of in your, I talk about it like butterflies in your stomach. Sometimes you know that you just have this feeling that, I can't be independent because, this is going to affect my brother's business, or this is going to affect my good friends, whatever, and you just don't feel as though you can be independent. That's what this is, a personal or private interest. Or, a personal interest is when it's going to affect you kind of personally mostly. So you have those butterflies, you know that you can't be independent. This is saying that's a conflict of interest and you should step away from that decision, whatever it is. Moving on, and examples of conflict of interest include discussing or voting in your committee, commission, board, or task force on anything which impacts, for better or for worse, an outside agency you sit on. So think about a board of directors, for example, for a local nonprofit. And the committee, so you happen to sit on that nonprofit board, and now that nonprofit is before the city committee that you sit on, and it's requesting something. Well, you have an obligation to your nonprofit board. You have fiduciary duties that you have to, look out for the interests of that nonprofit, but you also have a responsibility on your city commission. You're supposed to be looking out for the best interests of the city. And it's hard to do both of them, right? So that necessarily creates a conflict. You can't necessarily be looking out for both bodies at the same time. So that's a clear conflict of interest. Discussion or voting on putting a special parking space in front of your store when other stores are not allowed the same consideration. So this is another one where you happen to be on a board that's deciding a parking issue, and it's your store that's going to get a special parking spot, but the store 3 doors down is not going to get that special parking spot. That creates a conflict for you. Now, this parenthetical here indicates that you can vote, though, if it affects kind of the class of members the same. So if we're talking about all stores and putting a parking space, a dedicated parking space in front of all stores, then that store owner could go ahead and vote because it affects all store owners the same. Moving on to recusals. So if you have a conflict of interest, you have a conflict of interest, what's the proper thing to do? The proper thing to do is to step away from that agenda topic and just recuse yourself from it. And there's sort of this air of that recusal means you did something wrong. It doesn't. It means that you're being aware of what agenda topic is up and whether you as a public official should participate. The fact that you happen to own a business and something that your board is considering might benefit your business doesn't mean you did something wrong. You're just being aware and saying, I need to step away from this because I happen to own a business. So when you recuse, it says here, should I stay or should I go? The best practice is to leave the room or the virtual meeting. The reason for that is, even if you recuse yourself from a topic, even if I'm sitting here and I'm recused, the deliberations start and I'm making faces, and, you can still influence the public body because of those expressions you're making, or the public body just feels uncomfortable deciding it in a way that isn't to your benefit. So the best thing to do to make sure the public body can be independent and come to its decision, the best decision, is for you to recuse, leave the room. If it's a virtual meeting, turn off your video so you can't be seen. It's fine if you continue to listen to the meeting, but you shouldn't be seen. Moving on to these next 2 slides that are titled Beyond the Code of Conduct, they really talk about a scenario not specifically set out in state code of conduct, but it's kind of important to understand because it happens frequently in a municipal setting where there's multiple boards and committees. So that first bullet says, even though a particular set of facts and circumstances may not suggest an actual conflict, the same facts and circumstances may nevertheless prohibit the affected individual's participation as a perceived conflict. So you might not actually have a conflict where you're going to have financial gain if you participate, or where you're going to have a benefit to a close friend if you participate. So there might not be an actual conflict, but in certain instances, and this gets a little more detailed, so we won't get too deep into it, but it's mostly when you're sitting in a quasi-judicial capacity, making a decision that's sort of a judicial one. that even the perception of a conflict of interest, the member of the public body should step away and not participate. Second bullet says a perceived conflict is separate and distinct from the off-cited participation as a member of the public. Restated, even if an individual is permitted to participate in a particular process as a member of the public, he or she can still be disqualified from future processes due to a perceived conflict of interest. And we're going to see that on the next slide. So next slide says Delaware law does not prohibit officials from participating in processes simply because the individual is a city official where there is no actual or perceived conflict of interest. And there's an example provided here. It says there's no per se rule prohibiting a city commissioner from participating in a hearing before the Rehoboth Beach Planning Commission as a member of the public. However, if the official in question takes a public position concerning the application and is later asked to decide the same application as a city commissioner, that official could be precluded from participating at the commissioner level due to perceived conflict. And this happens frequently. I had a jurisdiction recently where its planning commission was considering a site plan application. And in that instance, the planning commission was final. So the planning commission got to make the decision on the site plan application. And if it approved the site plan, it was done. Well, it was required to conduct a public hearing, and during the public hearing, not one, but two members of the town council testified during that public hearing, and they testified on a particular issue. It was kind of a definition in the code, and they gave their perspective of what that definition meant. The site plan was ultimately approved by the Planning Commission, but the appeals process that was set out in that town's code said those appeals go to the town council. And wouldn't you know, an appeal was filed and went to the town council. And the appeal, of course, was on the specific issue of what this definition meant. They thought the site plan should have been denied because of their reading of the definition, which was a different reading than the Planning Commission made. So the appeal comes to the town council. Those two members that testified at the Planning Commission, which was fine to do, and they had every legal right to do it. But now that the application is before the town council on an appeal, they have to step away because they're not unbiased. They're not neutral on the issue what this definition is. They've actually said it earlier. You see this happen a lot too in candidates forums. Sometimes we call candidates forums recusal night because inevitably the candidate's going to be asked about some controversial issue that's kind of percolating up through city government. And the candidate is going to say, I think it's a horrible idea, or I think it's a great idea, and here's why. And then they get elected, they're sitting at the dais, and the issue comes before them, and somebody's going to say, when you were a candidate, didn't you say? And then they're disqualified from participating. So that is a really basic overview of ethics. Do we have any questions?
Ann, go back one slide, please. I want to emphasize this about conflict of interest in this example here. City commissioners making a comment on a planning commission issue. Be advised that it's also applicable to a Board of Adjustment member if they make a comment on a planning commission issue and then it comes in front of the Board of Adjustment. Same thing with a planning commission member. If they make a statement on something that then comes in front of them, they need to recuse. Probably less so maybe for committee members because they're advisory, but certainly for the commissions and boards that have authority. In terms of recusal, that's a critical thing, and it keeps yourself safe from conflict of interest just by getting up. And a lot of people want to give an explanation about why they have to get up and leave. And no explanations needed. In fact, no explanations desired. Just get up and say you recuse, get up and leave the room is the proper way to do that. Two examples that I think are monumental in the ethics. One is that an example, you're on a board and you say, whether you reveal you're on a board or not, you start acting on something such as if you were a commissioner, by example, and you were on a board from one of the local agencies and you're conducting budget meetings and trying to decide whether or not to give that group money. Obviously, that's a conflict of interest and you need to step down off it, but that happens a lot in different, not in the city necessarily, but the different groups, that they're on a board and they don't recuse themselves. The other thing, I think I hit it. Let's go to questions. Ann, if you want to take that down. Mary Peck, your hand is up. It might still be up from last time. Take down there we go. Mary Peck, your
I don't
hand's,
have a question. I'm sorry. My hand is still up from
your
last
hand's
time.
still up. There you go. Anybody else have questions? We'll
have
go
one.
to Mike Strange. Go ahead, Mike. If you would talk in the microphone so everybody can hear you.
Hi, Mike Strange, and I'm also a Planning Commission member. And in looking at the last one with regard to recusal, and I have made submissions for the street committee, for example, and others, and I said I may have been a planning commissioner, but I'm responding as Mike Strange for Stokely Street. What if those observations are just observations of material fact and law and aren't opinions? In other words, you separate that out and say, with regard to code XYZ says this, yet the application says that. It seems to me that that's not an issue if later it comes before the board where I am a planning commission member, because I was asserting simply facts and not giving opinions. Is that a significant difference? I hope.
I think so, and all these are, kind of the nuances that we get into, but I think sort of maybe a distinguishing factor for me is when it becomes persuasive. So if you're sending something in and it's of a persuasive nature, here is this data that I've located and it tends to say this, here's why it's important to this application, and here's why I think you should do X, Y, or Z as you consider this application. That becomes persuasive, and that's stepping over the line. But if you simply say, I came across this tech manual that happens to be on this issue, I'm providing it to you for whatever it's worth.
Right.
No problem, I don't think.
Okay. Yeah. I was also a Boy Scout, and the other part of that was, aside from everything you said, was always be prepared.
Be prepared, be prepared, the Boy Scout motto. That's right.
Try to educate.
On
Anybody?
the recusal, I just go back to that because it reminded me of a funny, when you said it's best not to give any explanation, I can remember being in a meeting where a member was recusing, and they spent probably 6 to 7 minutes describing what they said, why they said it, how they said it, and why they have to recuse. So they basically kind of took over the meeting to say, here's why you should do this or that, and it did it. It set a bad tone for the discussion because they aired all of that openly at that point.
And essentially, they ended up giving their opinion.
Right. They participated when they.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Anybody else virtually like to have questions or comments? We appreciate you being here. Again, you are here because you're a volunteer on one of the city's commissions, boards, committees, or task force. I personally, and on behalf of the mayor and commissioners, thank you for being on that task force or committee, whatever you're on. We appreciate it. We know there's a time commitment there. We appreciate you coming today. We thought that this would be a good introduction to you into the transparency issues that the government officials have to follow. Again, you are now part of the government, but also just wanted to share, these are not new. These are things that the mayor and commissioners have been following, as well as all the committees have been following forever, essentially. Others that are absent, that are on your committee, will be required or requested to take these. This is recorded. They'll be asked to listen to it and then contact Ann with any questions. Good news, I'm making this a one-time deal, so if you've seen this, you don't have to take it on an annual basis. New people will. Again, if you have any questions, please, your first reach out could be your chair. Your second reach out would be Ann Womack. She is our FOIA coordinator. If there's no further questions, do you have any further comments?
I don't, Mayor, thank you.
Ann, do you have any further comments?
I have no further comment.
Okay, we've got one more question. Mike Strange, go ahead.
Yeah, it actually combines both ethics and also the FOIA law. As a member of the Planning Commission, I have frequently had to use attorney-client privilege responding, asking Glenn a question, because in some cases in previous years, the applicants haven't been particularly ethical. And so I had to ask a question under attorney-client privilege. That was really not an issue when Glenn was both the city attorney and also the Planning Commission attorney. And now we have a separate attorney for the Planning Commission. So my question is, since we're perceived to be the same as a city employee, even though we're not paid and we're a volunteer, when a question comes up, do I have to make the call as to whether I think it's an ethics question or a Planning Commission specific question related to an application? But in other words, is there a dividing line there, or do I just assume if I have to use attorney-client privilege, I go with the Planning Commission attorney as opposed to you as the first person I would ask?
Well, since Luke is a teacher of ethics, I would go to him
Yeah,
first.
not only a teacher, Luke chaired the office, what's called the Office of Disciplinary Counsel. So it's the body that basically governs attorneys' ethics. So he ran that office for a while. So he's a real resource that we have in the city, and you're lucky to have him on the Planning Commission. So I would start with Luke on any Planning Commission issue or issue of ethics.
Right. At the moment, I can't think of the specifics, but it related to the city with regard to the actions that would have been exceedingly detrimental had the city been not aware of it. So I guess it's a question of sequencing. I'm assuming Luke would automatically communicate with you if it was something that he perceived would have materially affect the city. It's just a weird thing, but
Yeah, I understand. And Luke and I have had these conversations about, are there lines between the Planning Commission as client versus the city as client? And we both have said, we're sort of city attorneys, so the attorney-client privilege probably extends. But I would say in probably every instance, start with Luke, and then I would say to Luke, I'm happy, if you want to share this with Glenn, and that keeps the privilege. Yeah.
all right, excellent. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mike. With that, last chance for any questions, and seeing none, I want to thank everybody again, and we'll adjourn this training session at 11:07 a.m. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, everybody.